no matter who you are, no matter what your title is, no matter what organization you're coming from, it's okay to be a little humble, be self-aware.
Welcome to Rise and Stride, where we empower you to take your next step in an ever-changing business landscape. Here's your host, Denise LeDuc-Frumming, President and CEO of the California Society of CPAs.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Rise and Stride. With me today is Lorraine Lavitt, a senior client partner with Korn Ferry, where she has led the firm's association practice for over 20 years. In her position, Lorraine specializes in the recruitment of CEOs and senior level executives for associations and nonprofits, and over the course of her career has placed over 250 CEOs. Prior to joining Korn Ferry, Lorraine spent over 20 years in association leadership positions, most recently as Executive Vice President and CEO of the American Electronics Association, the nation's largest high-tech trade organization. She also served as CEO of the Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce and worked in a number of key roles at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, including Director of Domestic Policy and Director of Procurement Policy, and was a strategic planning consultant for Harbridge House Inc. and a government contracts consultant for Coopers & Lybrand. Lorraine, thank you so much for joining us. You have quite the resume, background, and placing 250 CEOs. That is many stories and I'm sure opportunities along the way.
Absolutely. Denise, this has been a marvelous career. And I must say that when I started this role, when I was recruited to Korn Ferry over 20 years ago, I had no idea what an incredible journey I was about to embark on. And these past 20 years have really been incredibly thrilling and impactful from my perspective.
Well, I'm sure in just the changes in the last 5 years that you've seen and that you're working through. I'm just really excited to talk to you. Like I said, we could go on for a long time, but we know we have a limited time, so we'll get to it. And maybe with just the first question, you can talk to us about just how we always say we fell into association world because none of us goes to high school and says, I'm going to be an association leader, because I didn't even know what it was. But we somehow navigate, and it works out that we love the journey and we stay in it for years and years. And it's a lot about the people, I believe. So how did you get into it, and what kept you going through the many years that you have served?
Thank you so much, Denise. It's a great question. And I actually reflect on my career, and I had 3 very different career pivots, none of which at the beginning made sense. But in the end, I look back and it all makes sense now. But at the time, it did not. I started my career as I was finishing my MBA at George Washington University, but at that time with a focus in government procurement and contracting. It was at a time when, in particular, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy was spending an enormous amount of money rebuilding, a depleted ship industrial base and the like. And I was brought in to do consulting at a firm called Harbridge House, which was created actually in Harvard by some leaders at Harvard Business School. And I was part of their consulting team working on Navy contracts and the like, and was recruited eventually to Coopers & Lybrand that had a government contracting practice led by a rear admiral. So it was a really interesting time actually in the nation during this buildup of the industrial base. But something really odd happened. One day, my boss, who was the partner in charge of that practice, said, I heard about a great job over at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce heading their procurement policy group, which I thought was odd since he was my boss and he was recommending me for a job at another organization. And I couldn't figure out why he thought I should be a lobbyist. None of this made any sense to me, but he said, I'd like you to go have lunch with this woman who is actually leaving that job to go work for General Dynamics. And I did. I thought it sounded very interesting. And I met with her. And by the end of our lunch, and then we proceeded to talk for another 2 hours at her office, I was completely sold that this made a lot of sense, but it didn't literally the day before. And she recommended me for her role at the U.S. Chamber. And that was the start of my association life. It was never my intention. I was looking to be a partner in one of these firms, as a consultant. I took on that role, but over a period of 7+ years, was given such remarkable opportunities. There was actually 2 CEOs ago at the U.S. Chamber. That's how long ago. But their philosophy was you were the president of your issues. You were empowered to do whatever you needed to be the best you could. And it was a learning I took away from that in terms of my management experience. But by the end, I was the director of domestic policy, running half of the domestic policy agenda for the U.S. Chamber, which was absolutely incredible. I left during the Clinton administration and was recruited to this as CEO of the Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce. And that was an incredible opportunity to run my own organization right in my backyard. Little did we know, it was at the beginning of a major technology revolution in the greater Washington area. And the board that I inherited was filled with technology leaders who are now, many years later, we look back as icons of the birth of the whole Northern Virginia and suburban Maryland technology corridor. It was absolutely incredibly exciting. But more importantly, it got me immersed in all the issues across the greater Washington region. To this day, I sit on the board of the Northern Virginia Technology Council and on the board of the Greater Washington Board of Trade to maintain those relationships with people I've known for literally decades. I was then recruited to the American Electronics Association by the former number 2 at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And it was a brand new position to work alongside him and develop this global association. We had offices in 17 cities in the United States, as well as Asia and in Brussels, very significant footprint. And he too empowered me to run with it. I led at that point in time all the operations, but also I had policy in the beginning before we did some reorganization. And he was heading all of our global and very high level policy work. So for that period of time, I just had an incredible opportunity to work at arguably one of the largest national associations, that being the U.S. Chamber, run my own Metro Chamber, and then take on the technology industry at a time, once again, when the technology industry was taking off. It was pre-dot-com all the way through that I got to do it. Until I got a call one day from a recruiter, a very good one at that, from Korn Ferry, who said, your name came upon our radar as someone who might lead our association practice. To which I was not really sure why I was getting the call, because it had no interest to me at the time. I wanted to be the CEO of my next association. That was really my goal. So I figured I would take the lunch opportunity to keep my relationship strong at the firm, which is a tip to your listeners. Always take that call. And so I did. I was very honest with the recruiter, who was working directly with our CEO for practice leaders. And in essence, he said, I think, you have just the right background. We're not looking for a search professional. We're looking for someone who knows the association arena intimately and has worked for boards, really understands the unique dynamics of volunteerism, membership, value proposition for membership, and advocacy and policy. And I resisted it pretty vigorously, to which he challenged me to create whatever I wanted to with this practice. He gave me full charter, and I thought about it, and we came up with a plan. And 20.5 years later, I'm still there leading the practice.
It is such a story. And it's, you're right, there's a lot of tips in there, I think, too, from always take the call. And when I listen to your journey, it's just continue to hone your skills and your competencies. It is a journey, and you don't know where it's going to take you. You just have to be open, right? So what's next?
Absolutely. And I think to that point, very often I speak with association executives who say to me, I've been in an association arena for 20 years or so. What else can I do? And the reality is there are immense transferable skills that an individual has from leading organizations in the association arena. And I could map those over, certainly, if you'd like to at some point. But coming from an association, moving into a for-profit environment where you have clients, a la members, okay, same kind of thing, value proposition, both cases, being able to influence and bring compelling, persuasive points of view and argument, being able to communicate with boards effectively and work with them and respect them, being able to work with volunteers who serve on search committees. They're not getting paid to do that work, respecting their availability and their points of view, knowing how to balance and make sure they're collaborative with each other and drive consensus across them. Think of those skills in an association setting, but also think of them in terms of a corporate and business setting and how valuable those skills are. So my advice to leaders who are interested in making that transition is to map out those skills that they've honed and been very expert at and see how they align to other opportunities if they desire moving into another realm.
I think that would be our version, our part two of this one day, because I don't know that a number of young professionals also know how to map those. And you don't have to go, position to position necessarily. And now there's so many different roles. It's another thing I want to ask you about. You have to map your skills because there's likely you can create your own role. There's so many opportunities. So we definitely will need a part two for sure. But just another question as far as, seeing what you've seen over the last 20 years, what has been some of the biggest changes that you've seen in recruiting? And then I'll follow up with kind of what you've seen in CEO roles.
Absolutely. It's a great question because things have evolved tremendously. When I think of, the first decade, if you will, and then I'm going to say the next 5 years, because the last 5 years have been unlike anything. But in terms of, first of all, the role of search committees, where I'm placing CEOs, there always is a search committee and a board that we work with. The way they're wired has a lot to do with the way a search committee is run, and the way they're motivated and the way they do business in their own organization is often brought into a search process. So think about, before COVID, everything was in person. There was just an immense amount of high touch in terms of the in-person engagement expected. So even how we constructed the way in which we work with people was so different. Years ago, there were some technologies that were just simply unavailable, but they are today. I'll give you a very specific example, which is obvious, and that's things like in background checks, social media checks. I mean, we didn't have that 10 years ago. Now it's ubiquitous. It's very straightforward. We inform candidates to expect that. And why is that relevant? Clearly, anybody who's in a public role where they're the face of an organization, whatever preceded them comes with them into that role. All of this is viewable by members, stakeholders, if they're a lobbyist. It could be in terms of the political arena. So we need to know that information, but it was more difficult to do that in the past. Now a board fully expects that will be done, and they will have insights into all of these dimensions around folks. Post-COVID, a whole other range of skill sets have emerged at the top of the list. And a lot of this also stems from the life that many of your board members are having, whether it's a trade association where you have business members or whether it's individual professional societies. Both are impacted by that trend. So one of the top things, which we didn't always hear in the beginning of my time with Korn Ferry, was human capital and the ability to very proactively engage people in a very different way. And that has evolved even in the last 5 years, from when we all were emerging from, our homes during COVID, finally getting out, to now when, people were very careful and worried about pushing on a new CEO that they had to move or had to relocate. That type of thing has just changed and evolved. And, that's one of the first things we ask when we start a search. We never would have asked that before. I mean, now we're saying, how flexible are you? Can this person commute? How many days a week do they really need to be at what's called headquarters, when in fact, most of your employees are on a hybrid or virtual basis? And so it's a new conversation. And in some cases, we have individuals who are in companies where they're all back in the office again. And then there are other people on a search committee that they're almost all virtual. Even among themselves, they're having that debate as to how to deal with it. So we as the search firm have to negotiate that and give rationale for why we recommend a certain path. So that's really big. I will tell you, in terms of change leadership, a huge competency and skill that we're looking for in leaders. Some people are really good at demanding it and telling you what, a kind of an authoritarian style. That does not work, as we all know. And so we're looking for people who have had a track record and success for bringing people along. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is an enormous expectation as well as should be. It was always important, but I recall when I joined Korn Ferry 20 years ago, a publication that's no longer in existence called the National Journal interviewed me. It was my first interviews. It was the publication for the advocacy community. One of the first questions they asked me about what is my point of view on diversity of the CEOs among associations. And 20 years ago, I don't even know if it was more than 10%, maybe, in terms of women who were CEOs. And at that point, I made the commitment 20 years ago that that's about to change, not just because of gender diversity, because there were incredibly qualified women who were not getting considered for roles for which they were clearly very ready for, but no one was calling them. So that is something I'm very proud of just over the past 20 years of making big changes and the rate at which we've been placing outstanding women and people of color and diverse populations. I think that's been a great change, but that's another change, Denise, that I wanted to mention.
I mean, we've seen it too. I've seen it in the CFO roles. I mean, we say it went from CFO NO to CFO no, right? KNOW. And just the relationships you have to have. And said something about consensus building that I think is critical, especially in the association world. Because if you can't bring people together, it's not you just don't win. You have to be able to bring people together and help them just kind of navigate really some of those common tenets that they have. And just a curious question for you, because I think before we didn't have to be as concerned about looking at commonalities. But today, when there's so much polarization out there and differing opinions, it just seems so important to bring people together with, that common lens and looking at things just a bit differently, but trying to find common ground. Do you see that in just one of the skills that you're seeing or conversations that you're having with leaders?
Yes, it's such a great point. It's what's key is the way in which you do that. And I think that has evolved. I don't want to be too general, but there was a time when it wasn't uncommon to see people still with a little bit more of that authoritarian style, or somebody was sort of pushing people in certain directions, a little heavy-handed approaches. I saw that a lot in the past. Now I think people realize everybody in the room needs to have their voice heard. People are expecting that is, with the way you do business. And great leaders, whether they be in a search committee setting or otherwise, I find that they pause and make sure everybody is, even if they're dissenting, even if they're of a different point of view, people need to be heard. In the end, not everybody's going to get what they want out of the situation, but they need to be heard. So I think they bring that to their candidate pool as well. It's a point of view that if the organization operates that way as a value of the way they do work, they're expecting CEO candidates to also bring that style, and in terms of how they work with their staff, how they work with volunteers in different settings, and certainly how they work with their board. So I think to your point, I think consensus building, but doing so in a way that people do not feel that even if they're different, they're unimportant or they're marginalized, they still need to have their point of view heard and feel like legitimately, at least people listened and they understand, even if it's a dissenting point of view.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point for any leader that's listening. Just from a succession plan, CEO succession planning, because I think sometimes that you put on the back burner and you're like, oh, I'll worry about that when the day comes, but you need to be prepared. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about that, how important it is to make sure that you have that just in your toolkit to make sure when something happens, you're prepared.
Absolutely. I'm getting more and more requests from boards that are not doing a search. They simply want to be prepared. And it is a good governance mechanism. We highly encourage all boards at some point to be thinking about more than if, God forbid, somebody, leaves or wins the lottery on the positive side and their last day is tomorrow. Now what? in essence, having a playbook in place for, your first, second, third, and fourth steps, whether it's who's going to stand in as an interim, who is likely to serve on a search committee, or what will the composition of that search committee look like? Do we have a refreshed position description? That's a great example. Many times we are brought into a search where a retiree after 20 years plus of leadership is gone. There's no job description. Nobody even is clear on what their responsibilities are in writing. All of those pieces, if your listeners feel like this is familiar, you're not alone. This is, a situation, but all of those pieces need to be done. But there are some leaders who frankly don't encourage it. Maybe they're threatened. Maybe they think it's going to cause an acceleration of their departure. They don't know what, but in reality, that's not what's happening. It's simply just so that there's a file, so to speak, on your computer, if you're the chairman, and if anything should happen, you know what to do. And hopefully you don't have to look at it too often, but it's fresh. And we do that work for boards all the time. Another reason is sometimes they're wonderful internal candidates should the CEO leave or have a planned retirement. It's a great way to start looking internally about developing people so that you don't have to do a search. And so I've also had clients that have identified, 2, 3, 4 people they think over time they could be developed. And we've been brought in to help them establish who those people are and assess those individuals, and then provide coaching services to those individuals so that we are helping them prepare to have choices should they have a transition, and then internally they already have great talent. They don't even have to go on the outside. So that's another way to look at it, is some longer term development of talented people who, and even if they don't get the job ultimately, you've just invested in very valuable leadership coaching so they can even be better at what they do, and you're retaining them because they appreciate that investment.
I was just going to say, from a retention standpoint, that's perfect, right? So it does two things at once. That's interesting. So, and just another question, because you talk a lot, you say, oh, should you hire for skills? Should you hire for culture? What's more important? I have my thoughts, but I want to hear from you, the expert, just what you see and what's been successful out there.
So I'm going to cheat. You have to hire for both. I'm going to cheat. And I say that because perhaps that's just a Korn Ferry methodology. And so I'll explain what I mean.
Obviously, because you're successful.
I'll explain what I mean by that. When we embark on a search process and work with a search committee or board to get ready, just before we even go into the market, one of the first things we do is we speak with a lot of stakeholders on the board, the staff, and maybe some other people off the board that are important, or leaders in committees or whatnot, to listen to them on what they're looking for in their leader. It's a combination of skill sets, experience, but also leadership competencies, style, if you will, that will fit in the culture. So we listen for both. The second thing that we do is we use a leadership assessment that helps to define culture fit. It's one of the aspects and dimensions, and we look at personality traits, we look at leadership competencies, motivational drivers. These are all factors that help determine if they'll be a good fit with the culture. So we arm our clients with insights and information, both around skills, also culture fit, through our assessment tools, and look at what's the best combination of both. So someone who's certainly equipped from a competency standpoint to take on that leadership role, but also has a high probability of fitting with the values of the organization and certainly the culture of the organization. So perhaps, at the CEO level, I would say, a best practice, you don't have to choose one or the other. You could actually have both if you take advantage of some of the assessment tools that are available, and certainly Korn Ferry is a leader in that regard.
I mean, that makes sense. It just always is, what do you hire for, right? You kind of, like you said, you have to have both to be successful at the end of the day. You talked, a bit about DE&I and the importance of that, and the passion you have for just moving ahead on that initiative. And just, it's really the way we all work, right? How do you instill that, or what would be your comments, I think, for the audience on making sure that when organizations are hiring, they instill that. And I'm just going to give you when we were working on I was on a board and we were working on having engaging recruiting for a CO role. We want to make sure also that the search committee understood how they needed to interview and make sure that they were open and what they had needed to be thinking about. So what are your tips on, it's more than just checking some boxes, it's really that mindset. What would be your tips for the audience?
Well, there's a few things when you're thinking about if you're going to be part of a committee or constructing a group to do interviewing. First of all, the specification, the job description itself needs to be carefully reviewed in terms of the language that is used. So there isn't language in that sends messages or signals, if you will, that it has bias in it in terms of the candidate. So there are tools that we certainly use when we go through reviewing a position's description to be sure that it's welcoming to all readers. The second thing that I would bring up is the composition of the interviewing group. And I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, I recall working with a search committee that was deeply committed to building a diverse talent slate. And then if you were to look at the group, there was nobody on the group other than, white men on the committee. And I said, there's nothing wrong with the people on this committee. They're fantastic. I recommended augmenting this already wonderful group with some other talented people who represent different points of view. Some women, some people who are leaders of color. We thought that would be actually enriching for the conversation, more representative of the membership. And they responded in kind, but that's an example when you be proactive and think about the composition. When a candidate who is different, whether it's a woman or a person of color or an LGBTQ candidate, you want them to feel comfortable, welcome. And I think when you demonstrate that, it's important. And I have plenty of examples of where candidates have given me comments after an interview. They notice when in fact it is not a diverse group in any respect. And we want to be successful. This is a good tip just to think about. The other thing is, unconscious bias. We all have them. Who doesn't have unconscious bias? And anyone who says they don't even realize that they have it. So I respect those people, but they have it. So this is something we talk about, and there are some guidelines and tools that we discuss, because we all, in anything we do in life, we have beliefs and value systems and experiences from the time we grew up, and all of that comes to bear. And that diversity of thought is wonderful and rich. So we're not recommending people squash that. We don't want that, but we just want to be aware of that. So for example, if someone said, I don't want to talk to anybody from the X part of the country, because I don't like that part of the country. Well, by definition, that's a bias. Okay. So their resume happens to have that address on it. You're just not going to talk to that person because there's a belief that everybody from that area is thus in such way. I hear things like that. So that's a very simple example, but clearly there are many other things you and I could speak of where people have a belief system and impose that on a candidate pool. We want to try to avoid that.
It's interesting. The first thing that you mentioned was the language in the job description, because a lot of times we go to so many other pieces, but that just some of those words just makes people even not want to apply, right? So that's an important piece. Those were really good tips, Lorraine. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. The other thing, if I may, one other thing I want to add from a recruiting standpoint that we have found works very well. Korn Ferry made a commitment years ago that we were going to dedicate research resources to building databases of top talented, diverse candidates. And we do it 365 days a year. This isn't a one, you don't just start and say, okay, now I have to find, we have the resources. We've also, very importantly, and other groups can do it too, build relationships with organizations where the talent you're likely to be recruiting from have that talent in their membership so that you could source their leadership. Do you know people who happen to have this type of a background, whether it's, people, there are various organizations that like different kind of MBA organizations or chambers of commerce or others that are committed to various important populations. And when you start to build those relationships and really nurture them over time, you can open doors with a lot of really incredible people. So that's something we're very committed to at Korn Ferry, and it's served us very well.
Do you think I have this dream? I know I have many dreams, but I have one that I'd love to see it where someone could come to you and say, this job isn't working for me. I thought this, can you help me find, and sometimes this happens, you help me find a different one? Or do you think as a recruiter, it will come to a point where we can get more comfortable with talking about, I want to leave, or I need to leave, or, I don't see a fit for you. So maybe there's a different pathway, because you can only be successful, I believe, or be as successful as you can be if you really feel the purpose and if you feel there's respect there, right? So I don't know. Sometimes you get lucky and you can have those conversations, but I feel like it isn't the norm.
Sure. I think you're right. In our case, or I'll speak very personally, over the years, I've been so blessed to develop relationships with hundreds and hundreds of people. Because when you think of any given search, we have, dozens of candidates on a given search. Only some people can get the job. You get to know people, you like them. They were in other searches. You just start to build that rapport over years. And I've had those conversations with people who are, ready to move on and want some guidance and what, do I think that, they're, what if they say, am I wrong? Am I being too hasty? Should I stay anyway? How will it hurt my career? Those are a lot of big questions, and there's different answers to each one. When someone says, I don't feel like I fit, I ask, well, is anything illegal happening? Is there an integrity issue in this situation? What are we dealing with? Is it that serious versus I'm not getting along with my chairman? Those are two like very different situations, and I have very different answers to each and coaching that I would give. So I'm saying it really depends on what the scenario where someone says, I just don't feel, there's a lot, you have to get behind what is really going on. Is it about a moment in time? Is it about the career itself? Is it about the people they're working with? Is it something going on in your own personal life that you're bringing into that decision that maybe it could be clouded for the moment because of something else? So, everybody has their own situation. There isn't a one size fits all. The key is to have a cadre of people you trust around you, mentors. And it's not necessarily one person. You probably want to get a few different points of view because people are bringing their unconscious bias to that conversation. And you don't want to make a mistake because maybe one person has a bias and you're just following listen to it and then decide for yourself what really feels good for yourself about making a change. And the change, maybe you're still going to be there, but you're going to bring up with your employer or someone else the change that you're requesting. And you may be surprised, they may be really open to it.
Sometimes you just have to ask and don't ask, right?
Right. Understand your audience, right? Understand your audience and what motivates them. So if you're going to make an ask that that there's 0% chance they're going to go with it, they never have, and they never will, don't make that ask. But clearly, there's plenty you could ask for.
So good advice. You got to know in everything, know your audience, right?
Absolutely. Prioritize. An example, if I may, it's a little bit off that topic, but we're in contract negotiations often with candidates, when you're the one, we work back and forth with our client. And I always say to the finalist candidate, don't come back with 20 requests unless you prioritize them, because you know what? They may give you 15 of your 20, but they're the wrong 15 of the 20. And what you really wanted was one of the 5. And they think they did a great compromise and you are so unhappy. So, it goes to this point that you're bringing up, Denise. If you're going to ask for a change in your office setting, your roles, the development you need, really prioritize. What do you really want? As opposed to putting a laundry list up, which sometimes people do, and they don't get what they really want.
No, and it kind of puts people off too sometimes.
Absolutely. It's unfocused. It's unfocused. So
unfocused, yes. And I will say, Lorraine, because I've known, I don't know, our circles have across or passive, across many, many, many years, as you've worked to recruit in many of the areas that I've been in. And I will say you are known out there as the greatest advisor. So when I say I'm talking to Lorraine, it's like, oh, Lorraine. And Charles Russell, I don't know if you remember him from CAP. Yeah, I told him, I said, I'm talking to Lorraine. Oh, Lorraine gets the job done. No worries with Lorraine. Lorraine's always has it under control. So you have quite the wonderful reputation out
Thank
there.
you.
So
That's very kind of you. Thank you for
the
sharing that.
audience should know that they're getting good advice here. So I want them to just be aware. You being in the world and like recruiting 250 CEOs, what has been the biggest surprise or challenge or something you've said, wow, I just never thought it would go in this direction?
Yeah. It's funny. It's almost evolved over time. And sometimes sometimes it's the candidate that they ultimately select that I'm surprised. I might have a different point of view, but it is their organization. But people in general, I will just bring it down to that. Over the years, people do things that surprise you. Like, where did that come from? You just wonder. Professionals who are put in a setting and they handle things. It's usually because of stress or lack of preparedness or an assumption, I could do this. I'm a CEO already. I could do anything, and they walk into situations and I sit there and I see things unfold before my eyes and I'm thinking, something's not right here. This is not the person who I know. Like, what's going on here? And so sometimes, I guess maybe that's not like one big surprise, but it's a cumulative thing. I think we all go into the world thinking, wow, somebody's the CEO of X. They're experienced, they're articulate, they could do anything. And then I see them in a setting and I know it's one of those things. They're not prepared. They made assumptions. There's an arrogance to it. Something's going on here. And of course they don't get the job and they're very surprised and they're very upset. And then I have to explain to them why. Incredible people. So anyway, I don't know that that's a grand thing, but that's one of the things I have to say is no matter who you are, no matter what your title is, no matter what organization you're coming from, it's okay to be a little humble, be self-aware. That's probably one of the most underrated values that I hear in search committees when they debrief. I can't begin to tell you how many times they said, now that's a self-aware CEO. I like that. And I've had people ask to give me an example of something that's failed. The search committee will ask, and the person says, I can't think of anything. And so in that moment, I know it's over. I know they're not going to get the job, but the interview has to finish because we still have 20 minutes left and they're going to finish. They're going to be polite, but it's over. So my tip is self-awareness. So we don't lead to this big surprise at the end. Really carefully think about every opportunity. If you're going to put yourself out there, don't embarrass yourself. Be prepared. Follow what you were told to do and all that. So sometimes the surprises are just small, they are, but it happens a lot. So
just a curiosity, what's the percentage of time you're like, you're right, they're going to pick this person, they're not? You probably know. I mean, it's the right candidate.
Yeah, I would say it's not 100% that I'm right. Probably about 3/4 of the time. And that's because it's not a one decision maker. It's a group of people. And it's a group of people who have different lenses, different points of view, biases that they're bringing to the table. I often see that. I'm fortunate to do a lot of work with global search committees. Wow, are those incredible opportunities where we, have people from all over the globe who are investing time in a given board. And they're bringing their own culture, their own points of view, which are not the same as sitting in the US. I guarantee you that. And, they have a very strong point of view about a particular region of the world. If somebody's from the United States, they want to know that they've traveled extensively. Maybe they've lived abroad. What defines their global savvy? There's a there's a bias sometimes that if you're from the US, you aren't global minded. And that's not necessarily true, but they may be right in some cases. So I know in a debrief, they're going to bring that point of view. And sometimes it's hard to predict where they're going to end up because of all of those voices from all around the world, which bring different dimensions to the conversation. But I'm getting better at it. I've done enough of it. I'm getting a little bit better at it.
Well, because that's just adds another element of complexity to it, right? It's just different. So how would you, I'm looking at our time, but I have two other questions. What would be the top three characteristics you would say you need to have to be a leader, which you think are so important?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think that today, one of the things is about talent development is huge, and talent development is it's a huge bucket. Everything that you talked about before in terms of certainly, building culture and value, having being able to set values, understanding how the world has changed, and being able to lead in an environment with multi-generations that look at that world very differently and the way work is to be structured. Talent with the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what does that mean in the workplace? Professional development has totally changed. Promotions have totally changed. All of those factors, understanding how to increase engagement and what that's going to mean in terms of volunteer satisfaction, all of that, having the right skill sets on your team, so that you can be, for example, digital savvy and leveraging analytics and information in a different way than you did before. So it's all of those, that whole human capital piece touches everything. So that's huge. I would say the second thing is just generally agility, comfort with change, really being able to pivot and help the organization to evolve as those changes occur. Having your antenna up for what's happening next, that strategic mindset to be able to canvas your environment and foresee the trends that are going to impact your strategic plan, impact your members before they are already hit you, so that you're able to prepare and you're effective at translating those trends and those external situations into communication with your staff and your board to explain how the organization needs to evolve and maybe switch courses in some cases and perhaps invest differently. Perhaps an opportunistic situation happens to be able to have the organization agile enough. It could be a merger, it could be an acquisition, it could be a new product. It could be getting out of something that you're going to have to get out of, whatever the circumstance, but that's agility. That's sort of nimbleness, huge perspective. I think it's also this ability from certainly knowing how to evaluate and evolve a business model. And bring private sector kind of mentality into the situation. It's really huge. And so many times we're being asked to, make sure our slate includes people from both the association nonprofit community, but also people who would make a really good transition from the private sector into these roles. And we've been placing more and more people from the private sector in these roles. Time will tell how effectively they do and how long they stay, because that is a little different. But they're asking for it because there's a belief they're going to come with a different lens on value and products and pricing and all of these things. Totally different membership models than we all knew from the past. So they're thinking differently.
Yeah, I would say punctuate the private, but the business mentality, I guess that's that mindset, because everything's changing, right? And I hear all the time, we're looking at CPA, the business models there, we're looking at our education, but all of those are changing, and how you deliver and fractionalizing your resources. And it's all different. I love that world and I love change, but like you said, you got to be agile and dig in. So you have to love it. Yeah, it's great tips. So my last question to you is, I'm a middle manager and I want to be CEO one day. What would you say to me I should do in order to start preparing for the future I would like from a career perspective?
Certainly. First, I think it's important to understand what are those skills that high performing CEOs have, or just have an understanding of what does that even look like, and do a bit of a self-assessment of what's the gap from where I am today to that. What does that look like? The other thing is have a plan for how you're going to address. And it may be that you can't do everything, but there's certain things that you're particularly good at. Not all CEOs are great at everything also. Most CEOs probably have 80% of a job description, and we still place them because then they sort of scaffold around them other people who have great skills to augment their gaps. So I think it's having that, and then having a plan as to, is that something that you will exclusively learn on the job? Does it mean having additional academic preparation? If you're an association executive, does it mean getting your certified association executive credential? What does that actually mean for you? And have a plan around that. That's certainly one thing. But I want to add one more piece, because I do a lot of mentoring and coaching, not only of mid-management, but younger people who are early career. That, if you don't mind, I'd like to mention, Denise. And it's a bias that I've had. And I'll start, I hope it doesn't sound self-serving, I'll start with myself, but I'll speak about others. Very early in my career, this is back in my Coopers and Librarian days, I joined my first volunteer board. I was selected as a commissioner in a town called Fairfax City in Virginia. And I served on the Commission for Women. And I was by far the youngest person on the board by probably several decades, but that was okay. I wanted to give back to my community. It was my first foray. Well, I'll flash forward on that group for a number of years. We had solid projects that we did. I got to spearhead something. They kind of allocated, Lorraine, you handle this, you lead this, you do this. I get such opportunities because people were thrilled to have the youth on there and fresh ideas. And I was able to do more than in my day job I could have ever done. I started to learn because I did it outside of my day job in a volunteer role. I never stopped doing things like that. That was just number one. And then I served on numerous boards over life. I shared with you at the beginning, I still do in my community. These groups are craving young talent. And so I would highly recommend, people shouldn't say, I'll never get on that. I am a testament. I was in my 20s at the time. Like I said, probably the closest was several decades older. You could start. You don't have to start at the biggest board. That's not actually necessary. Start on something that you just care about. The other thing I want to advise is this: networking is huge with people that you couldn't ever get to talk to you. I'll give you an example. In our community, and I used to be the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce for Northern Virginia, so I think I will speak with authority in my community at least. There were CEOs who were passionate about different causes. There could have been American Heart Association. There was somebody who was really big at Easter Seals, American Red Cross, on and on. Well, they all have committees, task forces, boards, whatnot, fundraisers. And I'm telling you, the best thing you can do is take a look at who's on those regional and local boards and volunteer for something on one of the committees, volunteer to help on a gala. Those folks are enormously invested. They write big checks to those groups, and you will get to know them, and you will know them on a first name basis. They would never return your call otherwise. So the CEO of a major company whose icon you see every time you drive to work, that person could know you by first name if you do that. And I've seen it over and over and over, and I've advised people, and you just have to pick what you like and see who's on those boards and do it. So networking could be huge. You can get big leadership roles very early in your career, whether in your city or county, local government. There are commissions. There are chapters of every cause you could think of in your community. Pick something that you care about. It could be sports related. It could be your church, your synagogue, whatever it is. Get involved and get into leadership roles. That will help you in your career to move up the chain. I guarantee you.
Yeah, that is worth $1 million, Lorraine, because that's a call to action, honestly, to any young person that's listening to this, because that is where you get the connections, and and you get opportunities, right? And we say that even for us, get involved, because we'll let you hone your leadership skills where it's safe and connect you to people, right?
Absolutely. And I will tell you as a recruiter, and I think this is at all levels, when you submit a resume for a role and on the back it says volunteerism and you're on the board of, or have been on various groups, the interview might start with that. They may not even look at your skill. They may not even ask you, what do you do for, at the current job? The first thing they may ask you, I do it all the time. Tell me about that board role that you had. Tell me about what you liked about that and what you accomplished. What that does, it tells so much about your passions and where you've chosen your free time to spend time and invest in a meaningful something and how you define the outcome of that and why are you still doing it. You've just told that recruiter more than they'll ever know with respect to what are your day job.
That is a good way to end. And I will say how you started, take the call. So we've went from the end wrap to the beginning, but it all is empowering yourself to lead and be open to what's out there, right? So
Absolutely. Well said. And thank you, Denise.
oh, this has been fabulous. And I just want to say we are so grateful for your leadership in the profession and your partnership and having you there just as someone that we can lean on. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
And then I hope to see you, like our paths cross again at some point.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Denise.
Rise and Stride is produced by the California Society of Certified Public Accountants. To learn more, visit calcpa.org.